Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, visited Baghdad during an official visit. What's to expect? Good afternoon, this is Henry Keane on UATV channel, breaking the hard truth into easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. This was the first visit of the Ukrainian foreign minister to Iraq since 2012. Our foreign minister reports that the visit will mainly focus on the development of bilateral cooperation with Iraq. However, the Middle East rumor has it that Iraq might be a mediator in possible negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Well, let me try to explain it in easy terms. Iraq is an important trade partner for Ukraine. Before a full-scale war waged by Putin's Russia back in 2021, Ukrainian exports to Iraq, according to state statistics, amounted to almost $700 million, ferrous metals, oils, farming and pharmaceutical goods. The heads of MFA separately also discussed the export of Ukrainian grain. The ministers agreed to intensify cooperation in the fields of trade, education and digitalization. In general, more than 1% of Ukrainian exports went to Iraq, and the Russian attack created great difficulties for the country. The minister filled in his Iraqi counterpart on the efforts of Ukrainian defense forces to repel Russian aggression and liberate the occupied territories. He paid special attention to President Volodymyr Zelensky's peace formula for the establishment of just and lasting peace in Ukraine.
As I mentioned, we in Ukraine, we want peace. And of course, we have our vision of how this peace can be achieved, which is the peace formula presented by President Zelensky. We welcome every effort to restore peace in Ukraine. But there is one key cornerstone that must be laid down at the very foundations of every effort. And that cornerstone is the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity. So we are ready to talk with anyone and engage with anyone whose approach to restoring peace is based on the idea that Ukraine must restore its territorial integrity.
Thus, the first visit of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine to Iraq in 11 years should be taken as an impetus to economic cooperation in the conditions of war in the first place. However, some Iraqi mass media gives the visit a significance of nothing less but a future of world security. On the very eve of the visit, the Iraqi mass media Shafaq News Agency reported, citing a well-informed source in the government, that Kuleba will arrive in Baghdad to discuss Iraq's potential mediation between Russia and Ukraine. This source said that mediation was offered by Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammad Shia al-Sudani in a recent conversation with Volodymyr Zelensky. And Russia, with China's approval, of course, also agrees to similar mediation from the Iraqi side. Baghdad has recently been the site of talks between long-time rivals in the Middle East region, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Ultimately, this mediation bore fruit after the accession of China on March 10th, after negotiations in Beijing. Iran and Saudi Arabia announced the restoration of diplomatic relations, severed in 2016, and the opening of respective embassies within 2 months. So, in Baghdad, they probably decided to develop the previous success and become a mediator also between Ukraine and Russia.
This speaks, as I said, for the quality of the Iraqi diplomacy, and of course this experience and this success testifies that Iraq knows how to build bridges. But we should ask ourselves a question: why was this bridge built now and not a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago? And the answer is simple: because the moment has to come. So we definitely see Iraq as a country that is capable of building bridges. But as I said, Russia is on the offensive. Russia is seeking war. And this is the biggest impediment, the biggest hurdle on the way to peace.
In addition to Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey and Brazil expressed an interest in mediation. So many mediators these days. Why? In easy terms, for Iraq, after several wars, the constant fighting against jihadists and all these economic crises, it is important to improve its image on the international arena and, at the same time, to resolve the issue associated with the instability of its food supplies. What's to all other mediating countries of the region, the more, the better to Ukraine. This is positive because Ukraine can now independently choose an appropriate moment and the country as a mediator. It is always better to have an option than not to, isn't it? I know that Russians do not watch UATV. Why should they? What's to watch? All Ukrainians do is lie, right? In Bucha, they kill themselves. They abduct their own children and send them to Russia. They rape their own women and say Russians did that. They would do anything to slander Russians, those Ukrainians, even specially elected a Jewish president Volodymyr Zelensky to guise their national Nazi intentions. But maybe one or two Russians still watch us to see what the truth really looks like, and UATV welcomes these few Russians. The first step towards bracing the truth is to brace the fact that you don't know it. It's okay not to know. Nazi Germans did not know that there are Nazis until they learned there actually are concentration camps with furnaces where Jews were burned to ashes. They really thought Jews were just leaving for their historical homeland. The Russians are working hard rebuilding the railway station and the port of Mariupol in order to create a transport hub for the export of grain, wood and other resources from the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. It might look like a reconstruction until you ask yourself, who has demolished it all? Who has burnt it all to ground? And who has built it before the Russian reconstruction? The war against Ukraine has undisguised goals of aggression, if you have what it takes to look closer. It is hard these days to be Russian and try to find out the truth, because there is only one truth in Russia, Kremlin's truth. And even looking at that, you can suddenly see the Kremlin is openly bragging about the annexation of Azov Sea, a land corridor to the Crimea, and the largest grain harvest in recent years. Doesn't that somehow mean that Russia is economically exploiting and mercilessly plunders the Ukrainian lands? Russians, try to hear these terrifying stories echoing worldwide.
Є те, що нікому у світі неможливо ігнорувати.
There is something that no one in the world can ignore, how easily these beasts kill. This video, the execution of a Ukrainian captive, the world must see it. This is a video of Russia as it is. What kind of a creature they are. There are no people for them. A son, a brother, a husband, someone's child. This is a video of Russia trying to make just the new norm, such a habit of destroying life. This is not an accident. This is not an episode. This was the case early. This was the case in Bucha thousands of times.
So maybe it is Kremlin, and not the whole world that is lying monstrosity? Maybe cutting off heads, killing children, raping women, is that all fake? Or maybe Russian occupation really does mean terror and lawlessness? Russia turned our Ukrainian farmers into their serfs. The economic losses caused to Ukraine are all documented, and the Kremlin will be billed. Payment by way of reparations or seizure of frozen Russian assets abroad is inevitable. So, Russians, hear us. All operations of Russia of any kind with any property in Ukraine is looting, not a lottery. It is illegal. Attempts to sell Ukrainian resources abroad will undoubtedly have a diplomatic and sanctions reaction. Only deoccupation will put an end to Putin's lawlessness and restore normal trade in the Black Sea region. And even if you don't like it, Russians, this is exactly why Ukraine needs more modern weapons from our Western partners. And we are getting it, Russians. Just wait. Grain initiative under threat of shutdown. Russia again has blocked vessel inspections in the Bosphorus. Yesterday, on April 17th, the Russian side, for the second time, blocked the process of inspections of vessels in Turkey's territorial waters. These marine vessels are full of grain that is highly needed by the poorest countries of the world. Since April 10, The Russian side has unilaterally stopped registering Ukrainian vessels subject to inspection. Meanwhile, the Russians form their own inspection teams and plan to choose the vessels from the queue at their own discretion. It is not only contradictory to the internationally approved terms of the Grain Initiative, the initiative Russians have signed on their own, just by the way, and it is not only unacceptable for Ukraine, it is unacceptable for the whole world. Since November 2022, Russians have been sabotaging and delaying inspections under various pretexts, which has already reduced the volume of export of Ukrainian agricultural products to world markets by 18 million tons. Since April 2023, Russian representatives of the JCC, that is an International Joint Cooperation Center, have been interfering with the activities of Ukrainian ports by imposing their own criteria for determining specific vessels that will participate in the initiative. For example, since April 14th, Russians have refused to register 3 vessels, 2 of them headed to China, just by the way, without any further explanation. Obviously, the Russian side is trying to establish control over the number of loaded fleets and the direction of its work, violating international norms and Grain Initiative provisions. This is another Russia's attempt to dictate its policies to the world, endanger food security and use food as a weapon.
We have a critical situation. The Russians violated the terms of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. They decided to unilaterally change the plans of Ukrainian ports. This is unacceptable. Yuri Vaskov, Deputy Minister for Communities, Territories and Infrastructure Development of Ukraine.
Ukraine categorically condemns Russia's interference in the operation of Ukrainian ports. We hope that the UN partners and Turkey can still ensure that all parties in the JCC comply with the procedures that have worked for 9 months. Yet, look who's talking now.
Russians are to take into account their interests and the interests of the fertilizer producer during the extension of the agreement. Sergei Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia.
You know, while defending itself from Russia's full-scale aggression, Ukraine has managed to export more than 50 million tons of food for hundreds of millions of people across the globe. While Russia has been repeatedly trying to disrupt the work of the Grain Initiative by blocking Ukrainian ports. Its policy of intended delays of the inspection of vessels continues and seriously damages the effectiveness of the grain corridor. Ukraine fulfills all our obligations previously agreed with the UN and Turkey as mediator of the deal, and all our partners are well aware of this. The international community must make it clear to Russia that it will not allow it to use food as a weapon ever again. Ukraine continues its consistent and fruitful cooperation with African countries by attracting a number of special ambassadors for President Zelensky's Grain from Ukraine humanitarian initiative. We call on countries around the globe to join the Grain from Ukraine initiative in order to create food hubs in Africa, in particular in those regions which are critically dependent on food imports. In any country of the world wanting to get Ukrainian grain for any reason, whether economic or for the reason of that famine that is about to be caused by Russia, they should turn to the UN with an appeal against Russian grain blackmail and require Russian troops' immediate withdrawal from Ukrainian land. And those countries in Africa, unfortunate enough to prefer constant wars between clans and ethnic cleansings, or countries in Europe like pro-Russian Hungary, who are anxious for lowering fuel prices at the expense of Ukrainian blood and land, it is just not happening, guys. And if you are curious what is happening, then here you go. Last month, after talks with senior US officials, Egypt suspended a plan to secretly supply 40,000 missiles to Russia and instead decided to produce artillery ammunition for Ukraine, says the Washington Post, citing 5 classified documents. Well, welcome to the new world, where God blesses America and gives glory to Ukraine. And now, if you allow me time for MOPA, a minute of my personal anger. You know, we've been doing this wrap-up for how long now? Like 4 months, roughly. Not much, but at times of war, every day counts. I'm in no way saying here in Kiev it's like anywhere even close to Bakhmut or Avdiivka, no. I mean, I get to choose my wine in the restaurant. Yes, we're shelled. From time to time, we're under heavy protection of our air defense force. God bless these guys. Yes, we've spent days cut off power in cold and dark homes, but these are just days. Nothing even that close to that dreadful, deadly cold of winter trenches and a dead corpse of your brother in arms that you can't even bury because the ground is frozen 1 meter downwards and missiles and shells are flying over your head every single minute. For a month. So we're okay here in Kiev. And Erich Maria Remarque said it remarkably fine. The closer to the front line, the better the quality of people you meet. So true, and also true backwards. Because during these 4 months I've seen all sorts of people. But I accuse no one. There were times in my life when I was a coward. I was ruthless, careless, hypocrite. So be what you can and see what happens. It is your life. I don't judge people. At least I'm trying hard not to. But sometimes, sometimes I just don't know what to say.
Russia is interested in ending the conflict in Ukraine as soon as possible. Sergei Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia.
So, come again, Comrade Lavrov? You are interested, after all, in ending what? The conflict? What conflict? We don't have any conflict with Russia, Comrade Lavrov. We're at war. At war that you and your outdated Soviet monarch have instigated. Your criminal aggression against Ukraine is the reason for this war. So there is no conflict you can end, really. It is a war we will win. A war you are losing. So the only conflict you are trying to end here is the conflict of interest between you and the objective reality that is persistently telling you that it is you who is going to end. The end is near, Comrade Lavrov. The end of you, the end of Putin, the end of the Kremlin, the end of Russia as we know it. An autocratic, brutal, criminal, aggressive imperial entity that starts wars it can't even end, not to mention to win. This is the end of Russian spring that in objective reality means a nuclear winter for the rest of the world. I know you're laughing now, Comrade Lavrov. You fly so high, no one can judge you, right? But in objective reality, you deny so harshly how high you fly is somehow directly connected to how low can you go. Joseph Goebbels never thought he would end up in Nuremberg, sentenced to death. By the way, what's to the thing, you ending the conflict, that death sentence, the reinstitution of which you, Comrade Lavrov, and your ill Soviet comrade brutes are advocating these days in Russia, sounds perfect to me. I personally think that in terms of you and the rest of the Kremlin thugs, this is not only a perfect cure of a sore throat, but to all of your delusional conflicts with the objective reality. It was Henry Keane on UATV State Channel, bringing the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and tune for more tomorrow.